Our proud Staten Island veterans are once again telling the story of the Four Chaplains with a very special ceremony and breakfast here at LiGreci, Staten.
By the dawn's early light was proudly we hailed, and the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight. For the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the first in air, gave through the night, that our flag was still there. Oh, sailors, that star-spangled banner yet wave, o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. God bless America. My pleasure.
Okay. Thank you very much. Join us in the preamble of the American Legion Constitution. God and country. Follow our orders.
To uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States of America, to maintain order, to foster and perpetuate 100% Americanism, to preserve the liberties and instincts of association and laws, to recognize the sense of individual obligation to the community, state, and nation, to combat the hypocrisy of both the classes and the masses, to make right the master of mighty, to promote peace and goodwill on earth, to safeguard and transmit to posterity the principles of justice, freedom, and democracy, to consecrate and sanctify our comradeship by our devotion to mutual benevolence.
Thank you very much. You all please be seated. So last Sunday marked the 77th anniversary of the sinking of the United States Army transport ship Dorchester and the selfless acts of four chaplains aboard. The Dorchester tragically sunk on February 3rd, 1943, while crossing the North Atlantic, transporting troops to an American base in Greenland. A German U-boat fired a torpedo that struck the Dorchester, killing 672 of the 902 officers and enlisted folks on board, merchant seamen and civilian workers. Many of those survivors owed their lives to the courage and leadership exhibited by the four chaplains, men of different faiths, who in sacrificing their lives created a unique legacy of brotherhood. As soldiers rushed to lifeboats, Reverend George Fox, a Methodist, Jewish Rabbi Alexander Good, Reverend Clark Poling, who's Dutch Reformed, and Father John Washington, the Roman Catholic, comforted the wounded and directed others to safety. One survivor watched the chaplains distribute life jackets. When they ran out, they then removed theirs and gave them to four young men. As the Dorchester sank, the chaplains were seen linked arm in arm praying. An American Legion posts nationwide will remember, as we are today, Four Chaplains Day, with memorial services that pay tribute to the courageous chaplains and to the brave young men who lost their lives at a faithful land. At this time, I'd like to have Dennis and Mary McCoon come up for the POW MIA table ceremony.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see you all today. Those who have served and those currently serving in the uniformed services of the United States of America are ever mindful that the sweetness of enduring peace has always been tainted by the bitterness of personal sacrifice. We are compelled to never forget, while we enjoy our daily pleasures, there are those who have endured and may still be enduring the agonies of pain, deprivation, and imprisonment. The POW MIA issue is not unique to any one particular war or period in history. We know there were 4,452 unaccounted troops from World War I. 72,630 unaccounted troops from World War II, 7,602 unaccounted troops from the Korean War, 126 unaccounted troops from the Cold War, and 1,587 unaccounted troops from Vietnam. Before we continue the ceremony this day, let us pause for a moment to recognize our prisoners of war and missing in action. We call your attention to this small table which occupies a place of dignity and honor. It is set for one, symbolizing the fact that members of our armed forces are missing from our ranks. They are referred to as POWs and MIAs. However, we call them brother. We call them sister. They are unable to be with their family and friends this day, so we join together to pay humble tribute to them and to bear witness to their continued absence and sacrifice.
This table, set for one, is small, symbolizing the frailty of one prisoner alone against his or her oppressors. Remember. The tablecloth is white, which is symbolic of the purity of their intentions to respond to their country's call to arms. Remember. The single red rose in the vase signifies the blood they have shed in sacrifice to ensure the freedoms of our beloved United States of America. This rose also reminds us of the family and friends of our missing brothers and sisters who keep the faith, awaiting their return. Remember. There's a slice of lemon on the bread plate, which reminds us of their bitter fate. Remember. The salt sprinkled on the bread plate represents the countless fallen tears of the families as they continue to wait for answers. Remember. The glass is inverted. They cannot drink with us this morning. Remember. The chair is empty. They are not here. Remember. The candle is reminiscent of the light of hope which lives in our hearts to illuminate their way home, away from their captors and into the open arms of a grateful nation. Remember. Many of our brothers and sisters may never return. They have made the supreme sacrifice to ensure our freedom. Remember.
We pray to the Supreme Commander that all of our brothers and sisters will be home where they belong. We pray for a full accounting of all our troops from all wars so there can be closure for their families and friends. We pray that God watches over them, protects them and their families, but most of all, we pray that we all remember. Thank you.
Thank you. Does he have the remote to go? If everyone would kindly look over to the TVs in the corners of the room. We're going to play a quick video.
The Dorchester was docked there in New York City. The chaplains joined the throngs of men that were gathering on board the ship.
there were 4 chaplains. One was a Roman Catholic priest named John Washington. Another was a Jewish rabbi named Alexander Good.
There was 2 Protestants, Chaplain Poling and Chaplain Fox.
They were all lieutenants. They had all gone to chaplain school.
And the 4 of them found that they all had so much in common. They thought in terms of humanity and not just in terms of their own individual community.
As I went down in the river to pray, studying
America in 1943 was deeply divided. Those who did not share the same skin color or worship God in the same way lived largely apart, separated by prejudice, suspicion, and hate.
let's go down, come on.
Americans often focused more on how they differed with those of other beliefs than on what they shared in common.
That you had 4 chaplains who were of differing religious backgrounds and different faith groups were able to put aside those differences was really a testimony to their understanding that in order to be victorious, we had to work together.
A lesson the chaplains would teach every day with every breath. A lesson that would prove vital when the ship and its young soldiers sailed into deadly waters and into the crosshairs of a Nazi wolf pack.
The Dorchester ended up pulling in 3 days later to Newfoundland. The ship offloaded its precious cargo of men, not to sightsee, but rather for a 10-mile ruck march.
After the Dorchester left St. John's and went into the open sea, the Germans got word that the convoy was heading toward Greenland.
The Dorchester was now on a collision course with the enemy. Fear would stalk the decks. Its primary antidote, faith, and the 4 chaplains who understood its power.
On February 3rd, 1943, at 1 o'clock in the morning, we heard this tremendous explosion. We were hit by a torpedo. The torpedo hit into the right side of the ship. Everything went black. All lights disappeared.
Because everybody running like lunatics. It was every man for himself.
People were frantic. People forgot their life preservers. People who didn't have clothes on. Some of them were crying. They were just caught completely surprised, and they didn't know what to do.
The chaplains made their way to the top deck, doing everything that they could to try to give soldiers some direction in order to save as many lives as they possibly could.
The 4 chaplains took off their life preservers and gave it to men, 4 strange soldiers, who didn't have a life preserver on. And they gave it to them so that they could possibly survive this ordeal.
These chaplains, they could have been the first one to jump overboard into the lifeboats. They could have kept their life vests, but they made decisions. They were very courageous men.
The ship was about to go down, but the chaplains were about to lift their men to new heights. The 4 would come together to shine a beacon of hope in the ship's darkest hour.
That's when I saw these 4 men standing arm in arm on the top of the boat.
The chaplains locked arms and prayed together.
They linked arms, and then they joined in singing hymns, each of them in a different language. One was Latin, one was Hebrew, another was English, and they were humming these songs while the ship went down.
To see them in that disheveled moment of disaster all around them, And yet this inner calm in these four men, as they ministered to the people around them, was, as one man said, as close to heaven as I ever hoped to be.
I have the honor and privilege of introducing our guest speaker. Many of you know who he is by going down to Father Capodanno Chapel at Fort Wadsworth. Coast Guard Lieutenant Commander John B. Sears, 17-year veteran with 7 years reserve time and 10 active. Spent 13 years with Uncle Sam's Misguided Children, Marines. That's all right. We have 3 years with the Coast Guard, and he's got 11 months with the Navy. As the chaplain for the Coast Guard base, he has a very, well, not just the base, but all of Sector New York. He's there with his wife, Megan, sons Robert and Jack, and daughter Claire. He's got a few deployments, but he's got a year in Iraq, a lot of service time, a lot of dedication to our troops. I'd like to welcome him up and say thank you very much for joining us here. Commander?
Thank you very much. First of all, just let me say thank you for having me here today. It really does mean a lot. I want to thank you all for your service. Obviously, my family, my kids, grew up safe and free in a country because of the sacrifices that you all made as you came before. And in a rather self-serving way, which, as a chaplain speaking at the Four Chaplains thing, this is probably all going to seem self-serving, but let me say thank you as well, because I love my job. And if you all didn't serve and keep us free and keep our military going, it wouldn't have been around for me to have a job. So I got to tell you, I love what I do, and I thank you very much for all of that. I also want to say, too, that I want to thank you for what you're doing, because this is very important. Remembering what the Four Chaplains did, I will say, as we say in the Navy, a rising tide lifts all boats. And the fact that you all keep the story alive, that American Legion posts around the country during February annually honor them and their sacrifice is just a very humbling thing. It really is. As chaplains, we're sort of trained and perhaps used to kind of being in the background a little bit when it comes to our fighting forces. We're certainly there beside you if we're doing our job right. We're right there with you in the fight, but not a lot of recognition, and this is very important. I know I'm not naive, and I know that there are some people that I actually had someone, I will not say which branch or who, that actually looked at me at once and said, "Why are you here?" And that's okay. That's okay. That was a challenge, and I feel like I rose to it, and in the end was like, I'm so glad you're here. So that's a good thing. But what you all are doing for all chaplains by having these kinds of events every year is very significant. So, all right, if you will, bear with me just a little bit. I want to talk just briefly about the Four Chaplains and what I think they really brought to that moment and the things that retelling their story lifts up for all of us. Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. One of the unique values that we see in the Four Chaplains and the sacrifice that they made that day was calm. Calm in the face of not only distinct tragedy, but clearly death as it approached and was there at their door. We know the USAT Dorchester, sadly, lost the majority of those aboard. Of the 903 that were there, only about 230 made it out alive, about a quarter. 3/4 of those folks went down with the ship. And by the way, let me say as well that not only is what we're doing here today important in terms of the Four Chaplains, it's important for all of those that lost their lives that day. We remember not just those chaplains, but those that they served. And in doing some research, when I first learned of the Four Chaplains, by the way, I found that, back in 2012, the Chapel of the Four Chaplains, right down the road from us in Philadelphia, almost closed for good. And it was because people had lost a memory of the Dorchester and what happened that day. And the executive director said a very interesting thing. She said, it's not just the Four Chaplains, it's everyone that was aboard the Dorchester. And this chapel is their gravestone. This chapel is where those families look to and come to, their descendants come to remember their loved ones that were lost. So by keeping that alive, it's very important. When I talk about the calm, I'm particularly moved by Reverend Charles Poling. Charles Poling, the Dutch Reformed minister. I'm Presbyterian. Anybody here Presbyterian? No? Yeah, we're like the Marines. We're even fewer and probably twice as proud. Presbyterians are just old, dead white guys that sing hymns. But here's the thing. Charles Poling, in his memoirs and letters and things that his father had kept, his father was also a pastor, had asked his father to do one thing in terms of prayer. He said, don't pray that I make it back alive. That's selfish. That's not what I want you to do. I want you to pray that I have courage. He knew, and remember, this is 1943, the idea that we would win the war was not a foregone conclusion. And he knew, having been a younger man during the Great War, what he might face. And he prayed for courage and for calm in that situation. And so what I do believe he and the rest of the chaplains taught us that day was to have that sense of calm, that grace under pressure. And when we speak of grace, we remember that a light shines in the darkness, and the darkness does not overcome it. They say that many folks had been trapped below decks of the Dorchester. As you heard on the video, the lights went out completely. The captain had told folks, because they knew that they were being hunted by a wolf pack, to sleep with all of their gear on, all of their clothes and their life vests, everything else. Many folks had chosen not to do that because it was cold, and they slept down in the warmer parts of the ship that was once a luxury liner for about 315 people, I believe, that the Army so thankfully converted into a troop ship of quite different accommodations. They said it was much like a cattle car. But indeed, the grace that was shown by those four chaplains, and particularly I'm struck by Father John Washington. Washington was there with the rest of the four chaplains as they handed out life jackets. They graciously took what they had and they tended to the wounded while they were there. As folks would come up, they were seen actually physically working with those who were wounded and the things that they needed. Washington knew God's grace especially. You may not know this, but he was a kind of a rough and tumble guy. As he was growing up, he was actually part of a gang of street hoodlums, I guess they would say back in the day, and had also grown very ill at one point. A priest came to take care of him, and he was so moved by what he saw that he decided instead to join the priesthood and continued up until his death to show that same kind of grace to others. Greater love hath no man than to lay down his life for his friends. George Fox, much like many chaplains we have today, was actually a former enlisted man. He had been an Army medic in World War I. He had been in France in the trenches when gas was used. And actually, Reverend Fox, even as a medic, had already displayed the type of sacrifice and courage that we remember all four of the four chaplains for. When gas came, he went out to a couple of different people to rescue who did not get their masks on in time. He held his breath, removed his mask, put it on the soldier that needed it, and took him back to safety, and then went and did that again for another soldier that was in need. You know, we remember them not only for the calm they showed in that day or the grace that they extended to others to help them stay alive, but truly the sacrifice that they made. It has been said certainly that each one of them knew that once they gave up their life jackets, they knew they gave up their very life. They knew that when they hit those frigid waters and hypothermia set in, that their time would be done. And it's amazing to think of the kind of sacrifices that were made that day. Finally, I think, and this is a value that I think is so important for our time, and if you think about it, it really is. In many stories of heroism, we talk about calm, right? Or we talk about the grace that it takes to love that person to your left and to your right, the people that in the moment they say you are fighting for in the heat of combat. There are many, many stories of sacrifice in our military. Probably, well, certainly too many to mention, and far more than we wish, but many stories of sacrifice. But I think the way the Four Chaplains story really speaks to us today, too, especially, is the diversity that was there. For all men and women are made in my image. Rabbi Alexander Good, the one rabbi that was with them, was said to be a champion of diversity his entire life. In York, Pennsylvania, he began a Boy Scout troop. And while he was there, made sure that each young man in that troop could earn their badges for religious education in Catholicism, Protestantism, or Judaism. He brought and changed, they say, the character of York, Pennsylvania, in that he respected and cared for all folks there. And each of the chaplains, in turn, agreed. They say that the chaplains were truly friends, that the night before the sinking of the Dorchester, they actually, as a morale thing for the troops, did a little bit of a variety show. John Washington was known for playing on the piano and some quite colorful songs on the piano, no less. If you know a priest, you know that's not a big stretch. But, yeah, some of my best friends are priests, by the way. Yeah, they said that they were truly friends. They ate together. They talked together. Survivors say that they were an interesting group in the kind of bonds that they had. Once when Rabbi Good was going to hold a Jewish service on a Friday night, some folks that were on the mess decks didn't want to stop their card game. And Father Washington came up and said to them, no, you will stop your card game because we have some Jewish soldiers that need to worship God. The men promptly dispersed, and Rabbi Good did indeed hold his service. I think one of the greatest testaments is that as they stood locked with their arms, as they said prayers or sang in Latin, English, and in Hebrew, and they so calmly went down into the depths after providing what they could for those that they loved and they served, is the fact that they truly represented one of the greatest things our country represents, and that is to be an American. Because to be an American, for most of us, if not ourselves, for our ancestors, is to be from somewhere else. It is to bring that character and that passion for the traditions we have into the larger country, where we begin to become one people of many different backgrounds, many different faiths, but all with a deep love and allegiance, not only to our faith, but to this country and to the values that we hold. These four chaplains embodied very much in themselves those values that we seek to promote as a country. And so I just remind you and commend you to this day. It is my prayer that we would all have, in those most difficult times in our life, that sense of calm and grace, that if necessary, we are willing to make those sacrifices. And most of all, that we embrace one another. We embrace one another not only in our similarities, those high values that we hold as Americans, but also in our diversity and our differences. that we understand those things are what make us stronger, what make us better, and what make us unique as a nation, not just in the world, but throughout history. It is what makes us great. Thank you again for having me here today. Thank you really, truly, for what you're doing by having this celebration every year. I speak for at least all of my colleagues and chaplains that I know. This kind of recognition is humbling, not for myself. I'm not here for me, but just for chaplains in general. That you recognize the work that we do, often in private and those sorts of things, but it really means a lot. It not only motivates us, but it helps us in the work that we do every day. So thank you.
I'd like to say thank you very much to the commander and welcome to Richmond County American Legion as our newest member. All right, a couple of people want to get out. We're good till 3 o'clock. Oh, I know. There's still more food to eat. But I'd like to thank you all again for coming out. I'd like to say a couple of, I'm not good on the protocol yet, still learning that piece, but we have 2nd District Commander, Ms. Mary McCoon. Thank you very much for joining us. And the Department of New York leading candidate, Mr. Frank LaMarche. Thank you very much for joining us. And give all of yourselves a round of applause for joining us. So thank you. Our benediction will be done by Rabbi Mark Ben Aaron.
I don't know, rather than think of a good one, usually I'm told keep it brief. But first I do want to say thank you for having me. It is always a pleasure, an honor to be able to be here with all of you. Any way that I can show my gratitude to, as we just said, the greatest generation and all other veterans that have come and that are with us, and so I thank you. Dear Lord, source of all goodness, we thank you for this food that we've had, for the camaraderie that we share, that the blessings that we have in today's world. And I want to reiterate the important message and the lesson that I've received from the Four Chaplains, and that is, we don't ask, are you Jewish? Are you Methodist? Are you Protestant? Are you Catholic? We serve one another. And please, as we go out into the world today, after this wonderful breakfast, this wonderful brunch, that we remember the goodness that God provides for us. Remember the small wonders and not just the big miracles, the grand gestures, and be grateful to God and our fellow human beings. With that, I say amen. Amen. Thank you very much, and God bless each and every one of you.
Thank you.
And as we have one more big round of applause, thank you very much to the staff of the Staaten. As usual, they do a fantastic job making this guy fat, dumb, and happy. So, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. That's right, we're not done yet. We'll follow the program. So, if I could put my cover back on. Like I used to do with my students in the ROTC program, airs. And they would all perk up and look over. So, as we close our ceremony, I would like to have Mr. Howard Bregman come back up to sing God Bless America as we face the flag. And salute. 2.
Just a little history of the song. The song was written by an immigrant who was chased out of his country because of his religion. And we don't have to mention the religion. We know what happened. Came to this country as an immigrant, was drafted in the First World War, and did shows. But he was drafted, was proud to serve in the United States Army. He then wrote many songs. I mean, Broadway was his thing. And he wrote God Bless America. And his name was Irving Berlin. A great American. And the royalties from God Bless America are given to the Boys and Girl Scouts of America. So please, join me now in one of the greatest songs written by one of the greatest composers that ever graced us. God bless America, land that I love. Stand beside her and guide her through the night with a light from above. From the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. From the mountains to the prairies to the oceans white with foam. God bless America, my home, sweet home. God bless America, my home, sweet home. Thank you. You know, it's really funny. Now, here was a guy, Irving Berlin, a Jewish guy, and he wrote White Christmas and Easter Parade. So he wrote for everybody.
I know how I hate to get up in the morning.
Well, that was the Army song. But I was in the Navy, and I still hated to get up in the morning. Thank you very much.
I think that it's best that we speak to a current chaplain. Meet Lieutenant John Sears. He's from the United States Coast Guard, and he is a man of God in addition to being a man of his country. It's very nice to meet you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for your support.
So, what made you decide to enlist in the military?
Oh, well, I'd always had some interest, even in high school, and then had instead gotten a call to go to seminary. Got that spiritual call and went to seminary. And while I was in seminary at Princeton Theological down in New Jersey, we had some recruiters come, and that kind of stirred that, flame again, if you will, and decided to check it out. And here I am today.
When you first got started and you got through boot camp, did you begin as a chaplain immediately, or were you given other assignments?
No, so we don't go through boot camp. We go through OCS, and but yes, I was recruited to be a chaplain.
And as a chaplain, for those who may not be familiar, what does a military chaplain do? Are there any similarities with regular chaplains, or are there differences between regular chaplains and military chaplains?
Sure. So, as a chaplain, there are primarily four things that we do. We provide for our own. So I'm a Presbyterian Protestant, and I'll do worship services and such for my faith group. We facilitate for others. For example, when I was in Iraq, We had a minion. That's the smallest number of people that you can have to have a congregation for a Jewish synagogue. We were fortunate enough to have a minion of Marines there. So I worked with a friend of mine back in the States in La Jolla, California, who was a rabbi, Avi Libman. He sent over some supplies, and they were able to celebrate a traditional Passover there in Iraq. So we facilitate for other faith groups. Third thing we do is we advise. I advise my command in different spiritual matters and personnel, people-related type things, and care for the crew. We also advise individuals, which is really, it's more personal advisement. It's more like counseling, going to see a counselor for pastoral care and counseling. And then we do external advisement in terms of liaisoning with external groups, and how they can work with our unit and that kind of thing, which is not what we were doing today, but the American Legion is one of those groups, for example, when they come every year to do the Santa Claus visiting in base housing. One of the great things they do for us every year as volunteers, passing out toys to some of the kids. We'll work in tandem with those folks. And then the last thing, but I love this because it is actually codified into law, is to care. If you remember the Hard Rock Cafe, there are a few of those around, I guess, but their motto was "Love all, serve all," and that's sort of us as well as chaplains. We don't ask you what your faith is. You don't even have to be a person of faith. Our job is to love you and care for you on behalf of the command and our commander that we serve, and then ultimately, obviously, for our supreme commander that we serve.
It's interesting because not only are you with the Coast Guard, if I'm not mistaken, you're also with the United States Navy, correct?
I am. I'm actually in the Navy. I'm a Navy chaplain, but in the Department of the Navy, Navy chaplains serve the United States Navy, the United States Coast Guard, and the United States Marine Corps. And whoever we happen to be assigned to, we actually wear their uniform. So this is an active duty Lieutenant Commander Coast Guard uniform. That I would wear. The only difference is that I have a cross on my sleeve, so people know, as opposed to the Coast Guard shield. But yeah, it's a real blessing. They invite us in, they make us part of their community. It says Coast Guard on my uniform. I'm treated just like any other guardian, and it's a really wonderful thing. That they embrace us that way and bring us into their lives, so that then we can hopefully take care of them in their daily life.
You have been quite the well-traveled individual. Tell us about some of the places that you've gone to work.
Oh, well, first of all, being in the sea services, it's a lot of different platforms all the time. Whether it's the aviation community, when I was with MAG 14 with the Marines, whether it's at sea, like aboard the USS Iwo Jima, LHD, also with Marines, but that's the Navy and Marine Corps team actually working together down in the Caribbean after the Haiti earthquakes in 2010. And then, of course, again, also with Marines. I spent of all my time, I've spent the vast majority with the Marines, but down in over in Iraq, spent some time there. And then locally here with the Coast Guard, helping take care of our guardians that help keep our city safe and protect our city. We've got folks literally everywhere. I cover coastal Connecticut down to northern Jersey, and then all of the 5 boroughs and all of Long Island. So I get around, but it's good. It's good. I go where the people are.
Did you have any interaction with the people in Iraq at all? And if so, how did they receive you?
I want to say I didn't. I didn't go outside the wire, as we say. Wasn't doing a lot of community engagement or external advisement like we talked about before. Religious leader engagement is the term that the Department of the Military uses. I would say the only folks, actually not true. When I was in Kuwait, I did with one group of folks. But most interaction was folks that came on to base that were doing different jobs and things while I was there. But people were very kind to me, everyone was, very friendly, very gracious, very hospitable.
What do you feel is the biggest issue that all of the military chaplains are facing currently?
Honestly, I think it's the same issue that everybody faces, and that is just we all wish we had more time in our lives, I would say that's it. I'll be leaving today to go check on someone that just got out of the hospital with some heart surgery. It is. I wish I could clone myself sometimes. Not that I'm anything special at all, but just that there's so many people in the world. And this is true of all of us, right? Even you in your own home, right? You've got friends, you've got family, you've got neighbors that you wish you could do more for. That's my prayer. That would be the thing that I wish I could do. If I could sleep maybe an hour a day instead. But no, it's. I don't think there are issues facing chaplains as much as there are opportunities. We've got so much opportunity, and it's very different than in a church setting. You asked before. I work at the same place that my congregation does. I sleep in the same housing community that my congregation does. A lot of people that are involved in a faith see that faith group leader once a week when they meet, maybe twice a week, maybe 3 times if they're going to do an outreach project or something else. I daily get to live and work with my people, and that's so rewarding to be embedded into their lives. And it's a special honor, too, to be able to do that and to be drawn into those moments of significance for them, whether that's the birth of a child, sadly, occasionally the loss of a loved one, or the, great feeling of pride and dedication from a mission, accomplished and well done. So I love my job. It's awesome.
How often does the church play a role in an individual soldier's life?
Well, I would say for soldiers, Marine, Airmen, sailors, coasties, it varies. It depends. I think that just like we're a country made up of a lot of different people, that spirituality operates in different levels in people's lives. Mm-hmm. But what I would say is this, there's that old phrase, there are no atheists in foxholes. I don't think that's necessarily true. I've been in a few foxholes, and I think there's some folks that are atheists, and you know what? That's okay. The good news is there are atheists in foxholes, but there's a chaplain right there with them, meaning very specifically that while people's spiritual levels vary, chaplain's dedication doesn't or shouldn't. We're there for everybody and want to, like I said, love all, serve all.
So you're here at the Staten for the Four Chaplains breakfast.
Yes.
And you had the pleasure of speaking in front of the audience today. Was there anything that you learned about the Four Chaplains that surprised you?
I don't know. Surprised me as much as it was just edifying. And I'll say this: it was edifying to know in the first time I learned about the Four Chaplains, and then doing a little additional research for today as well, that some of the things that we do now, currently, so 77 years later, were things that were pioneered by folks like the Four Chaplains, meaning what we would call deck plate ministry, getting out and walking the deck plates, not staying in your office, meeting people, seeing people, doing all those kinds of things, meeting the troops where they are. The fact that the night before, they had no idea, but it ended up being the night before they gave their lives, they held a variety show for the troops on board just to raise morale. Again, something that chaplains are still doing today. And the fact that they worked so well. They were actually dear friends. Not just colleagues, not just people paying lip service to diversity and unity, but they were truly dear friends. And that's what I've experienced in my career as well. So I just found that particularly edifying to know that we're continuing those long lines of convergent faithfulness.
Before you started doing the story of the Four Chaplains or reciting the story, had you known about them at all?
Well, I mean, I did before today, but no, the Four Chaplains actually were Army chaplains, so I didn't hear about the Four Chaplains. In fact, gosh, I want to think, I was probably already serving. I don't think I even heard about them in Naval Chaplain School. I think I was out before I first heard about them.
Now that you know the story in full, are there certain things that you take from their lives before they passed away that you apply to your daily life?
Well, what I would say is, again, many of the things that that they were doing, chaplains are still doing today. It's common practice. It's part of our professional practice. But I'll tell you the thing that really hits home, especially in our country today, is that camaraderie and that commitment to diversity. Mm-hmm. I just think that's so very, very important. We can think differently than others, even about beliefs that are very important to us, that we hold deep in our hearts, and yet still embrace one another, care for one another, be countrymen, countrywomen together, support those ideals we hold in common, without conflict, without compromise, and without question. So I just think that's a powerful part of their message and the message of their sacrifice.
You being a chaplain, do you remember the day that Jesus came into your life? And if so, tell us what happened.
Well, I would say as a Presbyterian, it was the day I was baptized, and so I was a child. But certainly there are parts of my life over and over again where either at my confirmation, where I owned my faith on my own, 6th grade, I'll never forget that. But also lots of other moments throughout my life where, and I think this is how it is, you know, a lot of times we want to say, well, that's when I first came to God. And that's great. There are a lot of friends I have of other faith traditions too that say, oh, I gave my life to the Lord at this date, this time, this year. And I think that's fantastic. I think we should always follow that up with the question of, when did you do that next? In other words, when did you grow in your faith and deepen your commitment? When was the next time, not just when you met God, but when did you get drawn closer to God? Mm-hmm. You know, when did you, in the same way that with a friend or a spouse, you would recount the time, oh, we went and did this and it was so great, or we went and did that so great. I remember the day I met my wife, but I also remember all the significant moments since then. And I think we need to do that. We need to push ourselves to not only know the moment we really owned our faith and we came to whatever faith it is that we hold, but also keep in mind that we should be growing in that faith daily, monthly, yearly, and remember those moments as well.
To wrap up, do you have any hopes that you would like to make happen for yourself and for the people around you? And if so, what would they be?
Retire. I want to make my 20. I want to make my 20 and retire. I'm not a guy. Look, I'm not trying to make admiral or chief of chaplains or any of those kinds of things. My hope is that for me. Well, let me say this. My hope for my children and my wife is that they would be happy, they would know they are loved, and that as a family we would make a difference in our community. For me, I think I just want to know that I cared for people when they needed it. That's really it. That I brought joy to somebody's life that needed it. And I will say, fortunately, when we minister to people and we help people, and that's all of us, right? Everybody in life has a chance to reach out and help someone. We don't always see where the story goes from there. We meet, we do what we can, and they move on. I've been fortunate enough to have a couple of times, more than a couple of times really, that people have come back and I've found out how that story ends. And so, I mean, I'm blessed. I'm just a blessed guy.
Sir, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And I'm Jamie Hickson, reminding you, always put your faith in God and always allow for Him to lead you to the right way. Thank you for your time.